Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to hear more. The sea remembers. It remembers the violence of storms, the secrets of ships long swallowed whole, the glitter of gold and emeralds that once gleamed in the hands of kings. And it remembers the Atocha. The year was 1622. Spain was at the height of its imperial wealth, swollen with the riches of the New World, pouring silver, gold, pearls and precious stones into the veins of Europe. The lifeblood of empires flowed across the Atlantic, a steady convoy of treasure galleons ferrying unimaginable wealth from Havana to Seville. Among them was one vessel that seemed destined for legend. Her name, Nuestra Señora de Atocha. She was built for purpose, not for beauty. A broad, heavy galleon, her oak timbers darkened by pitch, her hull creaking under the weight of Spain's ambitions. She carried cannons enough to defend her cargo. But what mattered most was in the dark hold below deck. Chest after chest packed tight with silver ingots, golden chalices, emeralds the size of a man's thumb, and pearls harvested from the Caribbean waters. The manifests tell of over 24 tons of silver, 125 bars of gold, 70 pounds of emeralds and thousands of coins, each stamped with the arms of Spain. It was wealth to bankroll wars, to pay armies, to keep the crown of Philip IV glittering on his brow. But treasure attracts tragedy, and the Caribbean is no gentle sea. On the 4th of September 1622, the fleet sailed from Havana. A convoy of 28 ships, heavy and slow, crept into open waters. Their sails were patched, their timbers strained, for these were ships built for burden, not speed. The air was thick, close, a stillness before a storm. And then the hurricane came. Winds screamed from the southeast, whipping the sea into walls of water. Masts cracked like kindling. Men screamed prayers into the howling dark. For 2 days the tempest tore at them, scattering the convoy, grinding timbers to splinters. On the third night, the fury reached its peak. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha groaned like a living creature as she was driven relentlessly toward the reefs of the Florida Keys. The seas there are treacherous, not deep abyss, but a labyrinth of coral heads and shoals, jagged limestone ridges lurking just beneath the surface, ready to tear open the belly of a ship. In calmer weather, sailors feared them. In a hurricane, they were death itself. The sky was black as pitch. Rain hammered the decks in sheets. Waves climbed like mountains, their crests torn to white foam by screaming winds. The rigging shrieked, masts bent until they seemed about to snap. Men clung to ropes, faces lit by the erratic glow of lanterns, their prayers drowned by the roar of the storm. Then came the moment, a shudder, a grinding shriek that tore through the hull as the Atocha slammed broadside onto a reef. The timbers split, the ship juddered violently, and the ocean poured in with a roar like cannon fire. Barrels, crates and men were hurled across the decks as the hull opened beneath them. Treasure-laden chests, each one packed with silver bars and coins, emeralds and pearls, burst loose from their lashings, tumbling into the flood. Some sank instantly, vanishing into the dark water. Others smashed open, their contents spilling in a glittering storm across the decks, before being swept out into the boiling sea. Imagine it, thousands of coins caught in the currents, tumbling end over end, like leaves in a gale, scattering far from the ship that once carried them. Cannons wrenched free of their carriages, crashing through planks, dragging whole sections of deck into the sea. Splintered beams punched upward as the hull broke apart. Men screamed as the Atocha began to disintegrate beneath their feet. And then the final plunge. The hurricane drove the remains of the ship, down into shallow waters where reefs gave way to sandy channels. The wreck did not sink in one piece, like a stone dropped into the sea. It tore itself apart as it went, scattering its cargo across miles of shifting seabed. Heavy silver ingots plummeted straight down, embedding themselves in sand and coral crevices. Lighter objects, coins, chains, jewels, wooden crates were carried by the surge, flung across the sea floor in long trails. Only 5 souls survived, clinging to the foremast that jutted from the waves. Everyone else, over 250 men, women and crew, were claimed by the sea. For Spain, the loss was catastrophic. The treasure fleet carried not just riches, but the financial stability of an empire. Without it, debts swelled, armies went unpaid, enemies emboldened. Divers were sent, chained with weighted stones, to grope blindly for the wreck. But the Atocha had settled too deep, broken and buried among the shifting sands. The Spanish crown marked the spot with buoys, prayed for calm seas, and returned again and again. But the sea, as always, kept its secrets, and for centuries the Atocha lay hidden, lost. This was the grave of the Atocha, a place of shifting sands, treacherous currents, and ever-changing terrain. The waters of the Keys are shallow, yes, 50 to 60 feet at most where the wreck came to rest, but they are alive, restless. Tides and storms sweep sandbanks from one place to another. What lies exposed one season can be buried meters deep the next. Coral reefs rise like jagged fortresses, masking wreckage within their labyrinths. Visibility shifts from clear turquoise to choking silt within minutes. For Spain's divers in the 1600s, descending with stone weights and crude masks, the wreck was already lost to the sea's camouflage. For modern treasure hunters, centuries later, it remained a needle in an ever-moving haystack. The Atocha did not lie waiting, intact and obvious. She was scattered, concealed, buried and reburied with every hurricane that swept the Keys. A ship torn to pieces, her hoard flung wide and swallowed by a seabed that never stood still. And that is why she remained hidden for more than 300 years. Now we leap forward in time, to a different age, and a different kind of treasure hunter. Florida, 20th century. The sun blazes white across the Keys, salt spray drifting on the wind, palm fronds rattling like dry bones. This was a place of sunburnt tourists and fishermen, of cigar smoke in Key West bars, of salty men swapping tales of shipwrecks and Spanish gold. And one of those dreamers was Mel Fisher. He wasn't a pirate. He wasn't a conquistador. He was a man with an unshakable belief that history's greatest treasures could be found, if only you were stubborn enough to look. A former chicken farmer and jeweller from Indiana, Fisher had the kind of restless spirit that made him ill-suited to quiet lives. He was a diver, a tinkerer, a man obsessed with shipwrecks. He had a laugh that rolled like surf, and a catchphrase he told his crew every single morning. Today's the day. It became a mantra, a promise, a prayer. In 1969, Fisher and his family, his wife Dolores, his sons Dirk and Kane, threw themselves into the hunt for the Atocha. Not the easy wrecks near the surface, not the half-forgotten timbers with little more than ballast stone to show. No, Fisher went after the legend, the Galleon of galleons, the one Spain itself had failed to recover. He mortgaged everything, he scraped together investors, he assembled a ragged crew of dreamers, divers and drifters, and he built machines to comb the sea. Imagine the tools of that first era of modern treasure hunting. A rusting workboat creaking out over turquoise waters. Divers in heavy rubber wetsuits, their tanks clanging against the gunnels. Air compressors rattling, hoses snaking like eels across the deck. And Fisher's greatest invention, the mailbox. It was a simple, brutal device. Giant lengths of pipe welded to the sides of the boat, bent downward, redirecting the boat's propellers so they churned the seafloor. The sand and silt boiled up in clouds, revealing what lay beneath. The divers would descend into that chaos, eyes stinging, lungs tight, brushing their hands across coral and stone, searching for the glint of something unnatural. Coins, chains, a cannon half buried in limestone. Each find was logged, plotted, measured. Piece by piece they built a map of the wreck's trail, what treasure hunters call a scatterfield. But days turned to months, and months turned to years. The sun scorched their backs. Salt water corroded every tool. Hurricanes tore through the quays, smashing boats, scattering hopes. Investors grew restless. Lawsuits tangled the hunt in endless knots as the state of Florida tried to seize claims over the wreck. And still, Fisher would gather his crew each dawn, clap his hands and grin. Today's the day. The sea gave little, and only in cruel fragments. A single silver ingot, stamped with the mark of a 17th century assayer, a gold chain, delicate as lace, slipping free from the sand. A cluster of cannonballs, rusted to orange lumps. Each discovery was a spark of hope, proof that the Atocha was real, that her treasure was still out there. But it was also torment. For if the sea was giving up scraps, then the hoard itself must be near. Near, but still hidden, and then tragedy. July 1975. Dirk Fisher, Mel's son, was diving with his young wife and a crewman. Their boat capsized suddenly, violently, in the swells. All three were drowned. The Fisher family was shattered. For Dolores, it was almost too much to bear. She had given her husband her youth, her money, her children's lives. And now she had lost one of those children to the sea's merciless grip. Many would have stopped. Most would have stopped. But Mel Fisher, he did not. He could not. The Atocha had become his destiny, as inexorable as tide. Picture it now. The heat of the Florida summer presses down. The sea lies flat, glassy, deceptive. Fisher's boat, the Dauntless, bobs in the swell. The crew are haggard, sunburnt, eyes hollow from months of searching. They lower the mailbox pipes once more. The propellers roar, blasting white sand into the water like a storm of ghosts. Divers slip beneath the surface. Visibility drops to nothing. The water tastes of grit and salt. Their ears fill with the rumble of engines. They sweep their metal detectors in slow arcs, straining for the faintest signal. And then, a sound. A sharp, insistent beep. A diver's hand brushes something solid. Not coral, not limestone. Smooth. Heavy. A silver bar, glinting like moonlight in the silt. They haul it to the surface, muscles burning. The crew gather round, fingers trembling, eyes wide. The bar is stamped. Atocha! For the first time in centuries, the lost treasure of Spain has touched daylight. And yet, this is only the beginning. For where there is one ingot, there are hundreds more. But in this moment, the crew does not know that. They are standing on the edge of revelation, balanced between despair and triumph. They taste salt on their lips, hear the crack of gulls above, feel the weight of centuries in their hands. The Atocha has spoken, and the hunt has only grown more dangerous. The silver bar lay on the deck, its surface still damp from the sea. Men stared at it in silence, as though afraid the dream might vanish if they blinked. No one spoke for a long while. Then, slowly, the hush broke into ragged cheers, hoarse laughter, a kind of wild release that came only after years of hunger. But the sea does not surrender easily. That bar was not the end. It was a beginning, a cruel promise, enough to prove the Atocha was close, but not enough to end the torment. For years more the hunt went on. Day after day the crew returned to those same restless waters. They worked the Scatterfield inch by inch, combing sandbanks, probing reefs, lowering the mailboxes until the sea floor boiled like a cauldron. The Florida sun blistered their backs. Storms drove them into harbour, only to send them out again, their boats patched and weary. Each find was a jolt of hope, a gold chain tangled in coral, a cluster of silver coins, their edges softened by centuries of tide, cannons lying at angles, their muzzles choked with stone, and always the question: where was the mother Lode? The Atocha had carried treasure vast enough to bankroll an empire. The manifest listed her cargo, line by line, like a litany: silver ingots, gold bullion, chests of coins, emeralds and pearls. What they found on the seabed was real, yes, dazzling, precious. But compared to the manifest, it was crumbs from a feast. The wreck itself remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of sand and time. And then came the lawsuits. Florida's state government, eyeing the value of Fisher's finds, declared that the wreck fell within its waters. If that were true, then much of the treasure legally belonged not to Fisher, but to the state. Court battles raged. Lawyers argued in air-conditioned chambers while Fisher and his crew sweated under the sun. One judge ruled against him, then another. At one point, the state sent armed patrols to seize artifacts from his boats. Investors panicked. Debt mounted. Newspapers mocked him as a dreamer, a fool who chased fantasies while wrecking his life and his family's future. But each morning, Mel Fisher still greeted his crew with the same words. Today's the day. There were nights when even he must have doubted. Picture him standing on the deck alone, the stars wheeling above, the sea whispering against the hull. He would grip the rail, knuckles white, staring into blackness. His son was gone. His wife was tired. His fortune was bled dry. And yet something deep inside refused to yield. The Atocha was there. He could feel it. The sea was testing him, grinding him down, stripping away everything until only faith remained. Faith and obsession. By the early 1980s, the search had consumed more than a decade. New technology crept into their arsenal. Side-scan sonar, magnetometers, dragging behind boats like silent bloodhounds, sniffing for iron signatures on the seafloor. Divers worked in buddy pairs, tethered by rope and radio, speaking in muffled voices through masks as they swept the seabed. Still, the Atocha lay hidden. But the finds kept coming. Emeralds glowing green in the sand, delicate gold filigree, silver coins with the arms of Philip IV stamped deep. They found ballast stones, unmistakably carved by human hands, scattered in a trail that pointed somewhere. Always somewhere. The wreck was close enough to haunt dreams, and then in 1985, a signal. It was July, a month of blistering heat. The water shimmered, turquoise and silver. The Fisher crew were bone-tired, eyes red, patience thin. The magnetometer pinged faintly. Divers slipped beneath the surface, bubbles trailing into blue. There, half buried in sand, lay a field of silver bars. Not one, not two. Dozens. A cache so vast it seemed unreal, as though the sea itself had rolled back the centuries in a single breath. The divers ran their hands across the heavy ingots, brushing away sand to reveal stamped markings, the same marks recorded on the Atocha's manifest. Numbers matched. Assayer's stamps matched. The treasure was not random. It was the Atocha herself. They had found the mother Lode. When the first bar was hauled to the surface, Mel Fisher's voice cracked. "Today's the day," he whispered. And for once it truly was. Word spread like fire. Reporters descended on the quays. Investors cheered, Lawyers scrambled. Fisher, grinning through exhaustion, held a bar aloft before the cameras. The proof of his life's obsession. The greatest treasure ship in history had been found. But the discovery was not just about silver bars and gold chains. It was about the human echoes locked within the wreck. Divers found personal items, a pewter plate, its rim dented by use, a rosary, beads still strung on fragile cord, a rapier, its hilt rusted but unmistakably Spanish, even the bones of those who had perished, now resting in silence on the sea floor. Each artifact was a voice from 1622. Lives frozen in catastrophe, speaking across centuries. The treasures glittered, yes, but the human traces carried a weight all their own. Imagine lifting a chalice from the silt. Not just gold, but the very cup that once touched the lips of a conquistador, carried across an ocean, lost in a hurricane, and finally returned to the air by your own hands. It was history made tangible. The treasure was beyond imagining. Over 40 tons of treasure rose from the depths, a hoard beyond imagination, chests bursting with more than 100,000 Spanish silver coins, their surfaces still gleaming with the stamp of empire, 1,000 silver bars, each one heavy as stone, stacked like the very bricks of a fortune. 200 golden ingots, their surfaces glowing with a molten warmth, even in the cold light of the sea. Emeralds from the mines of Colombia, each gem burning with a green fire, so fierce it seemed alive, their brilliance undimmed by centuries of darkness. And pearls, pale, perfect, luminous, as if the ocean itself had preserved them in devotion, each one a tiny moon cradled in the palm of a hand. It was wealth on a scale that made headlines around the globe. For Spain, the Atocha's loss had once bankrupted kingdoms. For Fisher, its recovery transformed him into legend. But it had come at staggering cost. Years of toil, lawsuits that drained the spirit, the death of a son, the devotion of a family that endured ridicule, poverty, even despair. The Atocha had not yielded lightly. She had demanded everything, and Fisher had given it. Yet even as the treasure poured onto the decks, new dangers rose. The state of Florida renewed its claim, arguing that such riches belonged not to one man, but to the people. Federal courts became battlegrounds. At one point, the US government itself attempted to lay claim to the wreck. For Fisher, it was a nightmare. To finally achieve the impossible, only to risk losing it to bureaucracy. The legal struggle raged for years, climbing all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1982, before the mother Lode was even uncovered, Fisher had won. The court ruled decisively that the wreck belonged to him and his investors. By 1985, when the bars began to surface, the treasure was indisputably his. A lifetime of risk had been vindicated. Close your eyes and picture the moment. The deck is slick with seawater. The sun burns white above. Crewmen, ragged, half-wild with joy, are heaving bar after bar from the dive boats. Silver clatters, thuds, stacks in gleaming towers. Emeralds spill across wooden tables, catching the light like trapped fire. Gold chalices, crucifixes, plates and goblets lie side by side, a banquet of empire laid bare after centuries of silence. And amid it all stands Mel Fisher, his hair bleached by salt and sun, his eyes crinkled deep, his voice hoarse. He watches his life's obsession become reality. Not in imagination, not in whispered promises, but in weight and glitter and cold metal under his fingers. For a moment, the sea has given back what it took. But the Atocha was not finished with him yet. In the days and weeks that followed, storms threatened their work. Divers risked their lives in dangerous currents, pushing deeper into the wreck site, probing chambers where silt poured in like smoke. Sharks circled, equipment failed, greed whispered in the ears of rivals, and always the shadow of loss lingered. Every bar of silver carried the memory of Dirk Fisher, gone to the same sea that now surrendered its hoard. The triumph was real, yes, but so too was the price. By late 1985, Mel Fisher had achieved what kings, empires, and centuries of seekers could not. He had found the greatest sunken treasure ever discovered. The Atocha's name would live forever, not just as a galleon of legend, but as the wreck that proved one man's impossible dream could defy time, fate, and even death itself. Yet even with the mother Lode in hand, even with towers of silver gleaming in the sun, there remained the tantalizing truth. The Atocha was not fully spent. Her cargo had been vast, and though much was recovered, records hinted that more lay scattered, hidden still in the shifting sands. Emeralds whispered of in manifests, gold chains yet to surface, secrets still buried deep. And so the hunt did not end. It never truly ends. The sea did not give all at once, even after the great breakthrough of 1985, when bars of silver were lifted from the sands like bones of a buried giant. The work was far from finished. The wreck of the Atocha stretched across the seabed in a trail of scattered cargo, each storm and current of the past 3 centuries having dragged her treasures further from the hull. So the hunt continued. Divers swept deeper into the fields of wreckage. They found chests of silver coins, fused together into solid lumps by salt and time. They unearthed cannon after cannon, anchors, ships' fittings, and fragments of timber preserved in pockets of sand. And then there were the emeralds, Colombian emeralds, stones of a green so vivid they seemed to glow with inner fire. Some cut and set into delicate jewellery, others rough, uncut, as they had been prized from the mines of Muzo and packed into chests bound for Spain. Each gem was unique, a crystal of the earth, carried across oceans, lost to a storm, and returned to light by modern hands. Among them was a stone of extraordinary size, over 75 carats. It became known simply as the Atocha Star. In its facets glittered not just wealth, but centuries of longing, loss, and triumph. But treasure alone does not define a legacy. For Mel Fisher, the Atocha had become something greater, a testament to endurance. He was no longer just a dreamer, mocked in headlines. He was the man who had done the impossible, who had proven that history's greatest treasures still lay waiting for those stubborn enough to chase them. His name was etched alongside the wreck itself. The Atocha was Spain's in 1622. By 1985, she was his. And yet the triumph was always shadowed by the price. Every silver bar was a reminder of Dirk, his son, lost to the same waters. Dolores, his wife, bore the lines of grief alongside those of sun and wind. The family had given everything to this pursuit, years of struggle, ridicule, poverty and loss. And though the treasure brought vindication, it could never restore what had been taken. The sea gives, the sea takes. Always both. In the years that followed, the treasure was catalogued, conserved and displayed. Museums told the story. Coins and jewels were exhibited in cases where children pressed their faces to the glass, eyes wide with wonder. Collectors clamoured for a piece of history, and investors reaped their share. Some saw only dollar signs, but others, those who held a bar of silver in their hands, who traced their fingers across a Spanish seal, felt something deeper, a connection, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, that beneath every wave, beneath every shifting dune of sand, lie the voices of those who lived and died before us. Today, Fragments of the Atocha's treasure remain in private hands. Others are safeguarded in the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum in Key West, where visitors can stand inches from chalices, swords, coins and emeralds that once sailed on Spain's fabled Galleon. In glass cases they glitter, but they are more than artifacts. They are witnesses. Witnesses to empire, to greed, to storm, to death, and to one family's relentless pursuit of a dream. It should be noted that the day the Atocha's treasure broke the surface, the story didn't end. It changed. For Mel Fisher and his crew, the triumph came with a new reality: how to manage and monetize what was, by all measures, the most valuable shipwreck ever recovered. Decades of searching had left a trail of debt, restless investors, and staggering bills for equipment, legal fees and wages. The treasure was dazzling, yes, but it also needed to become liquid, to turn into something that could sustain the operation and reward those who had believed in the dream. Fisher had built his expedition on a network of investors, many of them ordinary people who had put in what they could afford to back the hunt. Some were dreamers like him, others were shrewd gamblers who saw the potential payoff. When the mother lode was finally uncovered, those investors had to be rewarded. So the treasure was carefully divided into shares, with a portion sold outright to raise cash, and other portions distributed as returns on investment. But Fisher was never interested in simply dumping the treasure onto the market. He understood that the Atocha's value wasn't just measured in gold and silver, but in its story. He wanted people to see it, to marvel at it, to understand that history wasn't just words in a book. It was something you could hold in your hands. So a balance was struck. Some items were sold, yes. Coins and emeralds, ingots and chains found their way into private collections around the world, bringing in the money that kept the operation solvent and satisfied backers. Mel Fisher even launched treasure division parties, where investors could draw lots for their share of the find, walking away with authentic silver coins or gold chains pulled straight from the sea. But Fisher also set aside a vast collection for preservation. In 1992, the Mel Fisher Maritime Heritage Society Museum opened in Key West, housing hundreds of artifacts from the wreck. Visitors could stand inches away from chalices, swords, crucifixes and personal items of the crew, objects that carried not just monetary value, but human memory. This dual approach, selling part of the treasure to fund the search and reward investors, while safeguarding the rest for posterity, ensured that the Atocha's story lived beyond the Fisher family's fortune. Of course, it wasn't without controversy. Critics argued that treasure hunting reduced history to commerce, that artifacts belonged in the public trust, not private pockets. Archaeologists bristled at the rough and ready methods of the divers, even as Fisher worked to catalogue and conserve much of what was found. But whatever the debates, one fact remained. Without Fisher's obsession, the Atocha would still be buried and silent. Because of him, her story was brought into the light, her treasures seen by millions, her legacy preserved as both history and legend. So the treasure was many things at once. It was capital, fueling repayment and reward. It was a commodity, coins and jewels passing from hand to hand. But it was also culture, preserved in museums, celebrated in books, films and documentaries, a touchstone for anyone who ever dared to dream of chasing the impossible. Close your eyes and imagine experiencing that moment where the impossible becomes possible, where endless searching suddenly transforms into historical discovery. A diver, adrift in turquoise silence, brushing sand aside with gloved hands. The faint glimmer of metal in the gloom. The sudden weight of history pressing into his palm as a coin comes free from the seabed, stamped with the year 1622. He surfaces, gasping, returning to the search vessel, the sunlight blinding after the shadows. On deck, men and women gather round, their faces lit not by gold but by something rarer, the raw joy of touching the past. It is not just treasure, it is story. And story, once uncovered, is a treasure all its own. Mel Fisher died in 1998, his quest complete, his legend secure. But his motto lives on. Today's the day. 3 simple words, a mantra of stubborn hope, of unshakable belief. A reminder that no dream is ever truly impossible if you're willing to pay the price to see it through. The Atocha lies quieter now, her broken hull still resting beneath the sands of the Florida Keys. Divers still visit her, researchers still study her, and treasure hunters still wonder what fragments may yet remain. For a ship like this, the mystery is never entirely solved. Somewhere in those restless waters, the sea still keeps its secrets. But above the waves her story endures, the greatest sunken treasure ever discovered, not only in weight of gold and silver, but in weight of human spirit. And perhaps that is the true treasure. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the fire burning.